Hello, Narnach here. Welcome to my Theorycrafting episode for Path of Exile Prophecy League. This league I'll be playing a Frost Shadow that will use the two new skills, Frostbolt and Vortex. So before we dive into the skill tree and skill selection, let's have a look at the actual new skills. Frostbolt is the first one. It's a level 1 skill. You should be able to get it basically for defeating Hillock or just buying it from Nessa afterwards. We'll have to see. And it's a slow moving projectile that pierces through enemies and deals cold damage. So think of it like a fireball that doesn't explode, but it always pierces through things. So it's a very simple, straightforward spell. It has 5% crit chance and 100% damage effectiveness. So as a result, all the damage modifiers you apply to it will apply at full force. Okay, so let's look at the next one, because Frostbolt is the setup. Vortex is the one that is actually going to finish things. A Vortex, it releases an icy blast that explodes around the caster and deals cold damage to the enemies. And it leaves behind a whirling vortex that continues to deal cold damage over time, and it chills enemies caught in it. If the caster has any Frostbolt in the air, it will explode around one of the projectiles instead. So Frostbolt is an ice nova that you can also make explode at a random or at a remote location by casting a Frostbolt. So that has options. It also deals a very strong damage over time component that is affected by spell damage. And it doesn't list in the tooltip, at least not on the website, how much frost damage is going to deal. But the more observant people who have studied the demo video have speculated that the damage over time is actually very significant, even more strong than Fire Trap is what I think CKD mentioned. So it is going to be a substantially powerful damage over time effect as well. So what are we gonna do with that? So let's open up the skill tree for this. So let's zoom in a little bit. I'm gonna play as a Shadow, simply because the Frostbolt Vortex combination, it's a 1-2 duo. Reminds me very strongly of Essence Drain and Contagion, and I had a blast playing that as a Shadow. And while the Shadow has a physical chaos focus, it also has a very strong elemental damage line and a critical damage line. So this build is going to focus on dealing heavy elemental damage, and later on, in late Merciless, we're actually going to spec into doing critical damage as well in order to maximize our chance of freezing opponents to provide ourselves with endgame safety. So early on, we'll take the elemental damage path, pick up Trickery, get Blood Siphon, because early on Energy Shield is weak and you need more life. So Blood Siphon, we pick up Coordination, Entropy, thanks to the Viper. There's going to be a Void Barrier down here, there is Blood Drinker over here, Nullification, Sniper, Cold-Hearted Calculation, and then Growth and Decay. And I take the left side of the arch here because of the life regeneration bonus. On the right side you got damage over time, which of course is also useful, but for early on I'm just taking this for the life regen. You can go up here, Written in Blood, Life and Energy Shield, and then head to the east side for Fingers of Frost. Enemies become chilled as they unfreeze, and you increase your chance to freeze things. So this is very heavily focused on just dealing a bit more cold damage, but mostly about freezing your opponents. Then on the left hand side here we got Melding, Life and Energy Shield, just for more defenses. And Deep Wisdom, it's the entry into the Witch Tree. And then you drop down here for extra mana regen and increase maximum mana, and picking up some more Energy Shield along the way and boosting your mana regen a bit further. I playtested a build that uses the exact same skill layout with the difference that I replaced Frostbolt with Ice Spear and I replaced Vortex with Ice Nova because they are projectile attack and an AoE attack that is centered on you as the caster. And I noticed that the build is very mana hungry. So picking up these mana regen nodes is pretty useful. Early on you'll probably want to pick up Soul Siphon and Mind Drinker as well. And then once you hit the area over here, you'll just refund these points and pick up the regen here. How that turns out in practice, I'll have to see once I start playing the build. But that's something that you might want to think about. Also, Heart and Soul, more life, more mana. Once again, just to boost our mana regen and our life for survivability. There's Arcane Focus over here for some energy shield, Blast Radius to increase our AoE and increase your area damage. Vortex is going to be very strongly affected by that. As well as the AoE will affect Frostbomb, which will help you tag things for damage reduction. Then you got Deep Thoughts over here, more mana regen. Probably once you got Deep Thoughts and you got the mana regen over here, then you can refund your Soul Siphon and Mind Drinker, because then you don't need them anymore. I playtested this with a level 80 character, and without Deep Thoughts and the 3 mana regen nodes over here, mana is abysmal, but just those 5 extra points spent will fix your mana problems just by themselves. It's really useful. Then we move up here for cruel preparations, more life and resistances, and then we go over here and take Breath of Rime and Heart of Ice. So this is basically the core of the build that you'll be aiming for while leveling. And the emphasis here is pretty strongly on just a bit of damage, but besides that it's mostly on just getting defenses up. So there's a lot of life, and once you get to the witch area there's going to be a bit more energy shield as well. Once you hit level 66, you're going to switch into the endgame build, because then you have your regen, you have your energy shield, your gear will actually be pretty decent with energy shield. And then we'll start switching into a build that will be the endgame. So Assassination over here and Elemental Focus will help you deal more damage, avoid status ailments and do more crits. And of course, crits with cold damage mean freezing, so that's for safety. Freezing is a safety feature of the build. Up here there is a Doomcast for more crits. There's the extra nodes here for energy shield, which are going to be become relevant. At any point, if you need a dex or strength, then we got practical application over here. There is the Mind Barrier for some extra blocking with the shields. We got Unnatural Calm. And down here, the Void Barrier, it's got some extra nodes. There's some extra nodes over here. It all adds up. And probably if you are... This is probably what you want to aim for early on. So it's not even with the extra nodes of evasion of the Void Barrier, but this is like the endgame core build. And after that you can pad it out with these, you can pad it out with some extra energy shield over here. And there's a couple of Snowforged over here, for example, does some cold damage and some crit chance. You can add that on top afterwards. But this time you are going towards the level 95, I think. Yeah, see, 92 once you got this. Most builds, for me, they don't pass past 80. And usually once you pass level 80, you have enough experience with the game to determine what your build needs at that point. But no, this is something that you can grow into. As far as Ascendancy classes are concerned, all 3 Ascendancy classes have a viable component. Personally, I'm gonna go with the Trickster, and that's because I really like Shadeform. That's just a personal bias. I really like shade form. 250 extra energy shield combined with the 250% bonus we get from the tree means this is going to be close to 900 bonus energy shield. There's a lot of evasion rating in here. 20% more chance to evade attacks while not on full energy shield means if you get hit, you are going to be evading things like crazy. So your energy shield recharge is going to kick in rather quickly. And once your energy shield recharge starts, your attack speed, your cast speed is actually going to be increased by 20%, which is pretty darn cool. The way towards here, your energy shield actually starts faster. You get 5% chance to block attacks and spell damage. And you have a 10% movement speed bonus while you're on full energy shield. So that's good when you're just running about between fights. So this is the normal bonus, this is the cruel bonus. After that, Patient Reaper increases your damage over time and it increases the recovery rate of your life, mana and energy shield if you have killed an enemy recently with damage over time. Vortex does damage over time, so this is basically gonna be up all the freaking time. Unless you are in an extended boss fight that doesn't have add-ons, like Dresso. Even with Azaro, the skeletal summons will give you quite a bunch of kills. So this will actually help boost your regen very, very strongly once you defeat Merciless Azaro. So that's gonna be fun. I mentioned all the different ascendancy classes are viable. For example, the Saboteur is this is usually focused heavily towards trapping, but you still get extra elemental damage. You have elemental penetration over here. 10% elemental penetration means your cold spells penetrate 10% more, which is pretty potent. Penetrate only works on hit effects. So your Frostbolt is gonna penetrate, your Frost Bomb's explosion is gonna penetrate, and Vortex's initial hit is gonna penetrate, but the damage over time component will not penetrate because it's over time and it's not a hit. Damage, the resistance reductions from curses will apply, Frost Bomb's reduction will apply, but penetrate will not, so that's something to keep in mind. Over here, more movement speed, elemental damage. And then you get to something that I think is a very interesting twist. You become immune to blind. Whenever you are hit, you got a 25% chance to create a smoke cloud, which blinds enemies nearby. And anytime you hit an enemy, you have a 25% chance to blind them. If they are blinded, their hit chance is halved. So this is a very interesting defensive tool. If they have issues hitting you, that means your energy shield has a better time window to actually start recharging. So you can do more hit and run attacks, as well as just saving you from barrages of hits. So that's a pretty safe tool. And as you move further, you get more elemental damage and movement speed. And then finally, you increase your damage against blinded enemies. And you take less damage from blinded enemies, and blind lasts longer. So in a build that uses evasion and energy shield as its defense types, blind actually is a very, very nice way to combine with it. And if you ever get the opportunity to defeat Zaro in the maps labyrinth, so that's the 4th labyrinth, and you get another 2 points, then you get 10% extra elemental damage. And here you don't get anything useful. So 7 points are useful, the 8 point is not. But Saboteur, because of the whole blind focus, actually has something to offer here. Alternatively, we got the Assassin, which is focused heavily on crits. So for this one we have just extra crit chance, crit multiplier, a higher crit chance against enemies on full life, so your initial hit is gonna crit them very hard, which means a higher chance to freeze them. And after they are frozen, it doesn't really matter if they die or not, because your second hit is gonna kill them. And basically the entire path over here, it's all crit, 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 crit. And there's power charges in here, so if you're gonna go assassin, you probably want to work into some way to obtain the power charges and modify your tree. So that's why I'm not strongly going for it. I'm actually just gonna go with the Trickster. So let's switch to the game itself and have a look at all the skills I'm using. So we have, let's see, start over here. So Ice Spear is what I was, actually, we'll keep it there. So Ice Spear is what I was using instead of Frostbolt. We're gonna link that with slower projectiles. So the projectile is gonna remain in the middle of a pack longer because it's a piercing. That means it's gonna hit multiple enemies in a row. If it moves slower, it's gonna stay in the pack longer. The Vortex is gonna run with Spell Echo, so you'll be casting it twice in succession. So combination of a piercing Frostbolt and a slower projectile will mean that the two casts of Vortex are hopefully gonna overlap inside of the pack, and maybe if you cast Vortex multiple times because it's a particularly tough pack, because of the slow projectiles, it's still going to be in the air. The upside of slow projectiles is also that the projectile does a bit more damage, but you're not really doing it for the damage, you're just doing it to slow it down. The added cold damage is a nice way to boost the damage. Maybe later on you'll actually take this out because Frostbolt is not really gonna do all that much damage for you, but early on it will help you because Vortex is level 31 skill. It will take a while to get it. Faster casting and, well, the skill itself. Fast casting means you can just cast it faster, so you're waiting less time to actually cast the skill. Okay, so the second chain is going to be for Vortex, which I'm testing with Ice Nova. Cold penetration is very useful for the first hit. It will pierce the resistance, therefore making the first hit larger, and as a result there is a larger chance of actually freezing opponents. You got Spell Echo to cast it twice in rapid succession and increase area of effect to affect more enemies. And especially if you have a tough pack that you need to chain cast it on, being able to just chain cast a Vortex like 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, however much you need. The bigger the area, the longer the single Frostbolt is going to be able to affect the pack with a Vortex. So that works. If you got a 5 link, then Controlled Destruction might be interesting. The reduction to critical strike chance actually is not that severe. Currently, and this is all with measured with Ice Nova, which has a 6% base crit chance, not 5%. So in this case, the crit chance is 18%. And I think it actually will get higher once you get Doomcast, and it becomes 24%. I just had to get a little creative. So Doomcast, though the critical component is basically one of the last things that you can add to the build. So at level 82 here, I've got the Deep Thoughts, I got the mana regen, I've got Unnatural Calm and not those 3 bonuses. I've got a Void Barrier but not those 2 bonuses. I actually have Occultist's Domination and Frostwalker over here because they do a pretty good boost to cold damage. And the very final one is going to be Doomcast to round out our critical components. So let's go back to skills, but Controlled Destruction, it adds 42% more spell damage, which is a pretty darn massive bonus to damage at the price of critting less often. But especially early on, now if you can't afford the mana for Spell Echo, or if you don't have it yet, or if you don't want to stand still, you add controlled destruction instead of spell echo, for example, and you boost its damage. Well, it's single cast damage, and then the thing is you do 1900 damage with a single cast. Well, with spell echo, it's a bit more, but you are pinned to the ground for a bit longer as well. So there are trade-offs to be made. You can also take the penetration out and put some destruction in. There are variations to play with. As I said, this is theory crafting, so I'm not quite sure what is going to be required. So okay, moving onwards. Frostbomb. Frostbomb is going to be our setup. Everything that is affected by Frostbomb while it is preparing for its explosion will have a 20% negative cold resistance modifier, which means basically they'll be taking 20% more damage most of the time. Frostbomb has a bit of a spin up before it actually explodes. By default it's 3.5 seconds. If you add less duration to it, that 3.5 seconds gets reduced to about 2.2 seconds. And you also get about 20% more damage on top. So the explosion that it does actually does more damage. Increased AoE because it will just make it affect more enemies, which is very useful. And as the last one, I'm experimenting a little bit with Hypothermia. So you do more damage against chilled enemies and you have a opportunity to freeze them. Because Frostbomb is going to be a big AoE that you will be casting like every 2.5 seconds. It will actually freeze quite some opponents, especially in more hectic situations where you're putting frost bombs down, you're casting vortexes, you're just doing all kinds of stuff. For movement, we got Flame Dash, which of course has faster casting. We also have Frostbite as a manual cast curse. I've actually tried curse on hits with Frostbomb. Didn't really work out all that well because of the spin up of Frostbomb that it only hits every 2 seconds, which means you have to actually wait for it before it becomes useful. While otherwise, Frostbite, you cast it, it's effective for 10 seconds. If something is not dead within 10 seconds, it's probably a boss, and that's okay. That's a special situation. But most of the time, with regular play, you cast a Frostbite, then you put down your Frostbomb, you shoot in a Ice Spear, or no, not an Ice Spear, Frostbolt, and then you follow up with Vortex. And that's a rhythm that actually works pretty darn well. So, when it comes to auras, Discipline, you're playing with Energy Shield, more Energy Shield is better. If you say Discipline, you also want to say Vaal Discipline, just as an emergency heal. And Clarity for more mana. As I said, this build likes its mana, so Clarity helps you out a lot. You can play without Clarity, but it means you will be drinking your mana potion a bit more often. If you run with Clarity, I currently got a level 6 Clarity in here, that's actually working out pretty fine and it's not preserving all that much mana. It currently preserves 100 mana out of 1000, so that's 10% mana reserved, which is okay. Let's see, finally a Golem. I've got an Ice Golem that I'm running around with some minion life and minion damage on it. And that's okay. You know, this is a high level character with low level gems, so the balance, I mean, the Golem kept dying, but then again, it's a level 42 Golem. This one belongs in Merciless, in Act 4 normal. It doesn't really belong in high-end Merciless. So I think once it's leveled, it should be fine. Alternatively, you can take the Stone Golem. It's also one of my personal favorites because of the life regen. Now early on you might want to choose to pick up a Stone Golem. In that case, bear in mind you need a bit more strength and dexterity to actually equip it. But it's gonna give you life regen, and early on, when your energy shield is low, the extra life regen is pretty darn useful, so that if your energy shield goes out, your life is actually sustained, rather than just instantly evaporating. And then later on, once you are relying more on your energy shield. Basically, once you have more energy shield than life, you can probably swap out the stone golem for an ice golem. Go for it. You can also put in a golem, a chaos golem or a lightning golem, or even go without a golem, but I figured it's always useful to have something that distracts the enemy, and the ice golem, being cold based, is thematically fitting. And that is everything I'm currently planning for. There are some open sockets, and I've got a whole bunch of gems over here. There's a lot of other gems that you can consider, and depending on, for example, the uniques you find, or differences in playstyle, or maybe how the leveling experience goes, you might want to think about other things. So one of them is Blasphemy. Blasphemy allows you to have curses active as auras, which is pretty darn potent. You got Enfeeble, you got Temporal Change, Elemental Weakness. These are all interesting choices for Blasphemy, or you could even put Frostbite in. So you don't have to manually cast it. The trade-off, of course, being it's only going to affect things that are nearby. So if you want to play a defensive Blasphemy, Enfeeble is pretty good because it makes it harder for opponents to hit you. And if they do, it's going to hit for less damage, and crits are going to be less efficient. Alternatively, you got Temporal Change. It makes enemies slower, move slower, attack slower, and it's makes damage over time effects on enemies better, if I remember correctly. Yes, other effects on cursed enemies expire 40% slower. So this means the damage over time effect from Vortex lasts longer on enemies that are affected by your temporal change. Alternatively, Elemental Weakness. Cursed enemies lose 30% elemental resistances. Doesn't only affect cold, it also affects fire and lightning, which this build doesn't really do anything with, but it is another aura. Alternatively, you put Frostbite in, and all enemies are just going to be more susceptible to cold damage and have a larger chance to get frozen. If you run with a ring like Dodir's Damning, which gives you +1 curses on enemies, boots like, what were they again? Well, there's a strength boot that allows you to also affect enemies with an extra curse, and of course you got Whispers of Doom up here, so enemies can have an additional curse. If you run with any of those things, then of course multiple curses can be active at the same time, and therefore you can have multiple curses attached to your Blasphemy, or you can combine a Blasphemy curse with a manual cast curse. Or you can even just choose to manually cast things without Blasphemy. There are a lot of options there. When it comes to running auras, there is, let's see, Arctic Armor. From a defensive point of view, Arctic Armor is pretty cool. It's extra physical damage mitigation, fire damage mitigation. And something that's actually relevant for this build is you chill enemies whenever you get hit. Chilled enemies tend to get frozen easier or take damage easier from things like Hypothermia, which I've got over here. So if you are pretty serious about Arctic Armor, the patches of frost that you leave on the floor, that will help. That's going to be pretty useful. But the damage mitigation component alone makes it something interesting to consider. The reason I'm not running it is mana. I am running Discipline because I personally favor Discipline over Arctic Armor. And if you have the two of them, you have a lot of mana reserved. And therefore your mana pool is going to be, well, pretty small. And your Vortex is going to cost 60 to 70 mana if you got it fully linked. And it's probably going to be a lot more once there's a 5 link or a 6 link into play. Ice Spear or Frostbolt is also going to be about 40 mana. Frostbomb is actually the cheapest of your spells with about 35. So you will need quite some mana, and therefore preserving too much is not going to be good. Purity of Ice is also a very interesting option because it increases your maximum cold resistance. And because it does that, if there are elemental reflect enemies, your cold damage that you deal to them is going to get reflected back to you. The higher your cold resistance is, the less damage you take. Purity of Ice at level 20 will increase your maximum cold resist by 4%. So your 75% is going to become 79% cold resistance. Those 4 extra points, effectively it's going to be 16% damage reduction, which is pretty significant. If you combine it with a unique shield, Kaltenhalt, which is a low-level shield, increases your maximum cold resist by 5%. You have Aegis Aurora, a very rare endgame shield that also increases your maximum cold resist by 5%. Then that 79% suddenly becomes 84%. That is going to be another 20% damage reduction. So there are a lot of options that you have to boost your maximum cold resistance. So if you are running a map that has elemental resistance all applied to everything, this could be an option to run with. Okay, so cast 1 damage taken. If you decide, like, you don't really care about a buffed up golem, or if you rearrange some things, get a little bit creative, you might eke out the couple of sockets needed for a cast 1 damage taken setup. A classic, of course, is a level 1 cast 1 damage taken, so it triggers often. With an Immortal Call, you can get it up to level 3 to stay under the level 38 requirement. And then you combine it with just a max level increased duration, because it only affects Immortal Call and it doesn't really need the level requirement. That means you have a Immortal Call that triggers just about every 500 damage. So currently it's going to trigger 6 times before the energy shield runs out. And it will help you deal with spikes of physical damage. You don't need endurance charges to make it effective. The 0.4 seconds boosted by this is going to be about 0.6, 0.7 seconds. Strength is going to be your only concern. Cast 1 damage taken needs 39 strength. Immortal Call needs 79 strength. This build by itself is not strength focused. I've currently got a 91. And that is with a very high level character. And probably some strength on gear scattered about. So you will need to work a little bit. And again, you got nodes like physique over here. Pathing, there's another 10 strength over here. And there's a might over there, but it's actually quite a bit away. But if you're going to go for a variation that uses Zealous Oath, for example, you're going to pass by it anyway. Let's see, finally got Rapid Decay. More damage over time, reduced effect duration. This is an interesting variation to try out with Vortex, because a lot of Vortex's damage is going to be in the damage over time. Rapid Decay will boost that by quite a bit. And finally you got faster projectiles, which is an interesting variation for slower projectiles on your Frostbolt. Slow projectiles makes it move slower, so your Frostbolt is going to be inside of the pack longer, allowing you to trigger the Vortex more often. Another philosophy could be to have faster projectiles, so that when you cast it, it's going to reach the pack faster, and therefore allows you to cast the Vortex earlier, so your clear speed goes up. It all depends on how strong both of the skills are going to turn out in practice. If Vortex is going to be one cast, one pack killed, then obviously you don't need a slower projectiles, and faster projectiles can actually help you increase your clear speed. As I said, this is Theorycrafting. We don't know until we actually get the skills in about 4 hours from now. Or at least from when I'm recording this. So in terms of gear, the build I'm gonna play is gonna be Energy Shield Evasion. As a result, you'll want all the Energy Shield Evasion gear you can find. A Shadow Shield, a Spiked Shield will also have those properties. And actually, if you just have a look at how the skills are, there's a very good mix between blue and green gems. As a result, evasion energy shield gear is actually going to make it easiest for you to socket everything you want. You might be able to get like 1 or 2 items that are completely energy shield based, because some of the skill links are also completely blue. The one chain with Frostbomb that has some red in it is less duration. And if you're gonna go with a cast when damage taken setup, you might want to pick up one item that is either armor energy shield, or that is full armor, or energy or armor evasion, but something that at least includes the armor component, so it's easier to roll the 3 required red gems. And of course, if you're gonna go with Stone Golem, you might need it as well. Okay, when it comes to uniques, Carcass Jack is one of my favorites. It is energy shield evasion, which makes it so awesome. And the extra radius of area skills and extra AoE damage really boosts the Vortex. I really liked it with my Chaos Caster, where Contagion was the area of effect skill. But it's going to be very useful with this build all the same. Running with Flame Dash, if you go with a dagger, you might also consider Whirling Blades. Thing is, Whirling Blades is not a teleport skill, it's just a movement skill. It is chain castable, it is faster to cast, so if you are in a panic mode, Whirling Blades gets you out faster. The thing is, Whirling Blades, it is a attack. As such, you can link it with Fortify, which boosts your physical damage reduction by 20%. The thing is, if you do that, if you set that link up, you are going to be tempted to get into melee range of enemies more than if you don't have it. And as such, I'm actually choosing for a more defensive approach with Flame Dash. As such, daggers are nice because they can roll with caster mods, but if you find a nice wand, that will also work. Or if you find a nice scepter, that's also gonna work. So in terms of gearing, you are actually pretty darn flexible with this build. And yeah, for that it's the usual. Focus on maxing out your resistances, and then focus on just getting good evasion and energy shield. The best items will roll with a percentage increase to both evasion and energy shield, and maybe some fixed energy shield or evasion on top of that. Do I have some of them? I don't know. Life is also good to have. I mean, having life is better than not having life, even though in ideal situations, you're never gonna see your energy shield deplete. In the situations where your energy shield does deplete and you are getting into life, you are very happy for every point of life you have. Though, as always with caster builds or non-melee builds, you can apply the rule. If your energy shield is out, you need to be out of combat as well until it replenishes. Luckily, the Trickster, with all the bonuses to evasion, is actually going to make it a lot easier for you to recharge your energy shield even while you are in the middle of combat. I've done multiple Dried Lake runs, tanking Vaal, even on Merciless, and a full hit of Vaal might reduce your energy shield by half, but before the next time he tries to hit you, your energy shield is going to be full again. This build is pretty darn good at regenerating your energy shield when you need it. So it's pretty safe, and that's why I think it's going to be a pretty darn viable build for hardcore. But now I'm gonna stop talking because I've been going on for way too long. I'm gonna now wait for the expansion to actually be released, and then I'm gonna start recording the Let's Play. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again next episode.